In this tiny little tutorial video, we're going to go over the steps for how to simplify a fraction. So sometimes you have a fraction and it looks great, but you could actually rename that same amount with smaller numbers, which will make your life easier. So let's take a look at that. Let's consider the shaded part of this model. To name a fraction, as I know you know, you're going to count up the number of parts shaded. That is going to be your numerator, and the total number of parts, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, is going to be your denominator. This is a beautiful fraction, but it can be renamed using smaller numbers, even though the actual amount shaded isn't going to change. Let's take a look at that. Notice in this next fraction that we've inserted in there, the shaded amount is equal to the original fraction, but it's expressed in a much simpler way. We only have one piece shaded. In this model, we have one piece shaded, and we've got 3 total pieces. So how in the world do we go about finding these equivalent fractions to make our lives easier by using simpler fractions? Well, we look for common factors between the top number and the bottom number. In this case, we are able to divide the top number by 4 and the bottom number by 4 to get our equivalent fraction in a simplified form. You really need to know your math facts to be able to do this well, which is part of the reason why we have been trying to harass you about that all year long. So, the big rule is whatever you do to the top, you have to do to the bottom. And when we are simplifying, we are using the operation of division because we are trying to make those whole numbers look smaller. Let's take an example of one of these without a model. Let's look at this fraction, 24/30ths. We have 2 strategies we can take to simplify. If you know your math facts, you might be able to find a nice large factor in your head instantly. If you don't know your math facts, you might take a note of seeing that both of these numbers are even, so they can both be divided by 2. As long as I'm doing the same thing to the numerator and the denominator, I am on track to make an equivalent fraction. That is simpler. I have now made the equal fraction 12/15. However, 12 and 15 have a common factor besides 1, and that factor is 3. Some kids make the mistake of stopping here instead of going on to their next step, and this fraction is eventually going to be turned into a lovely 4/5. You can watch the video about finding greatest common factor here on this Blend website if you want to refresh about ways to find the greatest common factor in one big chunk. I want to show you one more way that you could simplify this fraction. Most kids find this way to take way too long, especially if they don't know their math facts, but just in case, I'm going to show it to you. It is a factor rainbow method. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a factor rainbow for both of my numbers, 1 and 24, 2 times 12, 3 times 8, 4 times 6, and I'm going to do the same thing for 30. I paused it so you wouldn't have to see me do all of that long work, but now that we have my factor rainbows made, we can inspect those factor rainbows and see what they have in common. I have 1 in common, 2 in common, 3 in common, 4 and 5 are not in common, 6 is common, 8, 10, 12, 15, 25, 30. So now I know that my greatest common factor is 6. That means if I wanted to simplify this fraction in one big step, I would take 24/30ths and I would divide the top number by 6 and the bottom number by 6, and I would come up with that same simplified fraction we did taking baby steps in the last example. I would have 4/5 for my final answer. Don't forget, anytime you're adding or subtracting mixed numbers, we always want you to make a habit of expressing your answer in simplest form. Thank you.